reprimanded. Heard? Marijuana flower, nigga, you can share with me.
Thank you for joining me on my podcast. My name is Mike Spivey. The name of the podcast is called Highlights, and the premise of the podcast is called Candid Conversations about Cannabis. That's what we're about over here. I will go through the history of cannabis as it relates to us in the United States, how it was once used as a medication or a common ingredient in medications, then it became demonized, then it became illegal, but more currently we're seeing that there is medicinal value in cannabis, and it is being used as a medication for children with diseases that have spasmodic responses like epilepsy and in some cases Tourette syndrome. We'll move on from there and we'll talk about some of the social dynamics that the laws and legislation that currently govern cannabis has disproportionately prosecuted different groups of people more than others. So that's a social aspect we'll get into. We'll talk about the new emerging cannabis culture and economy, how well things went in Colorado and how they were able to create enough tax revenue to take care of their tax debt and actually pay back money to the citizens of that state. There's so much to be said about cannabis, but there's an idea that I have of the type of people that I would like to create that have an interest in cannabis, and they're called cannabis culturalists. And essentially, those are enthusiasts that have found purpose in their life with cannabis. And being that we're coming from darkness into light, from nefarious illegal activities to legal activities, I want to be the person that walks you down that path. I want to be the person that helps you understand if there is a place for you in this movement, whether it be as a patient, whether it be as a provider, whether we're talking about states where it's recreational and you can just participate and figure out how cannabis can work for you, because there's definitely ways that cannabis can work for a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. Without me going through a whole life story of what it's going to be about, what it is and what it's not, let's get into it. Let's enjoy ourselves.
More or less, I'm talking heavy in everything I say, I mean. It's beyond this rap shit, it's where the ends meet the means.
There's multiple reasons why I became a part of this movement, and I should give you some of those explanations. Initially, one starts with, I had a close member in my family who suffered from rheumatoid arthritis really bad, and I started to be able to see the effects of cannabis in a couple of ways in that situation. Because the topical application of cannabis, I was able to see that there is some level of relief on a topical level, but it also decreases inflammation. That was something I was able to physically see with this loved one in my family. Secondly, when I became a part of this movement, I was motivated by my spouse at that point in time to actually go ahead and participate at Oaksterdam University and learn a little bit more, because I had a burning curiosity to know more after seeing a family member actually benefit from the use of cannabis. Benefit in a way that pain management was a little bit easier and that person didn't feel doped up. Myself, I've also been a patient, not being prescribed but being recommended cannabis in 2000. I had a car accident which left me incapacitated for a few days. But in my personal experience, how things work, I was on an opiate for pain relief. And that particular opiate would put me out of my senses for maybe 4 or 5 hours during the course of a day. Now, although I was sick and I was supposed to be at home resting up, I was afforded the opportunity to be able to work from home, and that was the type of job that I had at that point in time where I could make up time because I didn't work with necessarily physically with my body, I worked more with my mind. So it was more about making telephone calls and making connections and making things happen in that capacity. But when I took these opiates, it totally took me away from myself. It made me first off, I'd take one within a half an hour, I'd be asleep. And I'd lose about 2 hours of time during the course of that particular day. And that was time that I should have been utilizing for work. And I had a type of job where I had to call people on the East Coast as well as the West Coast. So I had to start off early in the day. And if I'm taking medication at 8 o'clock in the morning, to call people at approximately 11 o'clock on the East Coast, and I'm asleep for the next 2 hours, that delays my call schedule for the day. But more importantly, that took me out of my mental faculties a lot more than I really wanted to be. That's part of the reason why I actually use cannabis. It wasn't self prescribed, but it was recommended to me by a doctor in that situation, because when I actually broke my ankle, I had to take something for the pain so I could manage the pain and be able to function, but it wasn't as bad. I guess I'm one of those people who has a high tolerance towards pain, so I can actually deal with a lot, but I do not like being outside of my faculties. I don't like being in a place where I almost feel helpless, where I'm lethargic. So in dealing with that, I talked to my doctor. He said, I can't give you a prescription. And it was an orthopedic doctor that was dealing with my leg, but he was like curious as to why didn't you take your medication before you got here? And I'm like, I don't like losing time. What do you mean by that? Either way, he suggested if I wanted to try medical cannabis for pain management, to talk to I guess you would say my regular family doctor, and see if he would give me a recommendation because he was more familiar with my medical history. There is another factor that motivated me to become a part of this movement. And 4 or 5 years ago, I went to a normal convention where I met Alan St. Pierre. Alan St. Pierre was running the Normal organization, which is the organization that's fighting for the legalization of marijuana and safe access. I'll put it like that. And having that conversation with Mr. St. Pierre, he mentioned to me that people are disproportionately prosecuted. And when he said people, he meant minorities are disproportionately prosecuted for possession of marijuana and various other situations as far as the laws are concerned. And it more so happens to minorities than others. And he stated that there's no real representation in this movement of minorities, and I kind of wanted to fill that void simply because there should be some representation there. I'm not saying the NAACP should be sitting there, but I kind of think that way because it's something that affects our young black youth, our minorities in general. And if nobody's going to bring light to it, I don't have a problem with doing it myself because I love my people. Not to say that this movement is just for my people, but I'm definitely going to represent for my people, and that's just what it's about for me.
But my vision couldn't be clearer if I swim in Visine. So my
These conversations in cannabis culture are definitely relevant in 2018, and this is why, because this total landscape is starting to change right now. We've moved from cannabis having medicinal value to it having absolutely no medicinal value, to it being a Schedule I drug with no medicinal value to it, and that's why it's a Schedule I drug, to half of this country has some type of cannabis legislation, whether it's decriminalization, whether it's full legalization, or whether it's for medicinal usage. Cannabis is even being recommended for the use in children's ailments. We'll look at epilepsy. If you've seen or if you haven't seen it, MSNBC, there's been children that have been having up to 300 seizures a day, and their quality of life has been changed by one component that's in cannabis called CBD. It's vastly becoming very relevant. The fact that half the country is already there It's not long before there's a federal decision that's going to some degree, legalize cannabis so it can be monetized and the government can collect taxes on it. It'll be more widely accessible to the people, but it's about how all of this goes down. There's so much to be said about it, but as I had mentioned a little bit earlier, that there's a lot of people that are disproportionately prosecuted for cannabis charges, and other groups of people aren't. And that's something that really doesn't sit well with me. But it's another reason why it should be a topic of discussion until all of this changes. It should be a topic of discussion because there's little understanding what's going on with cannabis. People don't really understand the emerging clinical applications that are involved with cannabis, the things that cannabis can be useful for helping, whether it be rheumatoid arthritis, whether it be for inflammation purposes, irritable bowel syndrome. There's just about I just had a funny thought, and y'all gotta excuse me. It's just like when you see a medicine commercial and you hear all the ailments. There's a ton of different things that cannabis is really useful for in helping people. And in this book right here, I keep pulling it up, but it's Mr. Paul Armentano's book, which is the deputy director of Normal right now. But just to give you an idea, cannabis can be applied to gliomas, Alzheimer's, fibromyalgia, dystonia, hepatitis C, diabetes, pruritus, osteoporosis, MRSA, multiple sclerosis, ALS, chronic pain, Tourette's syndrome, HIV. There's a host of different things that cannabis is capable of doing in the medicinal field. If we're not having these conversations now, they will be had later. So why not have them now in the wake of all the things that's going on in the past few years? You have 3 states that have gone completely legal. You've got Colorado, you've got Washington, D.C., and you've got California. So it's time for this conversation to be had because, trust me, in the White House somewhere, somebody's making a decision somebody's making a decision as to how they're going to proceed with this, how they're going to monetize the government, how they're going to monetize state government, how are they going to make money? How are you going to make money? How are you going to be involved in it? How are you going to become a cannabis culturalist and find your niche if it's applicable to you? Think about that. That's one of the things I want you to think about because it's all relevant to us. It's a natural form of medicine. It's strictly plant-based. There's minimal processing done to the plant. And it has beneficial attributes. Cannabis is known to be one of the most therapeutic things in the plant world. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of the most therapeutic things in general. But that's just my personal belief, but I'll let you come to that conclusion for yourself because there's a lot of factors involved in cannabis and we need to explore them so we can be all well-versed and embrace the culture and assimilate it into our, lives and culture, period.
It's like a light bulb, they calling me Mr. Green. Got a green thumb, I guess.
The final thought, and I would say the chief goal of highlights is to create cannabis culturalists. That's my term. That's what I'm putting out there. But if we look at it a little bit closely, a culturalist, in terms of a Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, is one who emphasizes the importance of culture in determining behavior. The cannabis culturalist is the enthusiast that has found purpose for cannabis in their life and is looking for the assimilation of cannabis into their lives. So it depicts a process of learning, it depicts a process of teaching, and it depicts a process of absorbing. This is what we're going to create so that we can move into our future and embrace cannabis for what it is. Yeah, that's all I got to say today. I hope that y'all come back and y'all take this journey with me week after 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 week, because I'm going to do this shit till I die. This is what I chose to do. This is what I took the time out of my life to become proficient about. This is what I'm bringing to the table. Like it or love it. I still love you if you hate me. I love you if you love me. I love you, period. One love and peace.